Freaking hell. All right, I should be here now. All right. Freaking. All right, let's try this whole thing again. It really just takes the wind right out of your sails because this thing, I've had this thing pretty streamlined, and here we go. So I didn't even think about it. And system updates are fun, aren't they? Anyway, I wanted to talk about the, let me take this off now, if you guys have read that. I want to talk about the speaker comparisons from the past 2 days, because it's been very interesting to me to watch people's opinions and comments about that. I very deliberately, to some people's displeasure, did it as blind, so you don't know which speaker is which. And people were making, I have this speaker, therefore I love this speaker, therefore the speaker that I prefer the sound of here must be that speaker. Not always the case. I've had people describe, I don't like this brand of speaker because they are always the X, Y, or Z, and that's why I like this other speaker in this test, whereas the speaker that they were just saying that is always bad is a speaker they like the sound of. More interestingly, to take a long view, is that I think it's interesting that we have very different vocabularies to describe things. In both examples, all three examples, people tended to describe speaker A as brighter than speaker B. Speaker B, especially on the part 2 clip, where speaker B was actually brighter, had more high end. Speaker A had more upper mid-range. And I thought it was very interesting that a lot of people were describing upper mid-range like 1K, 2K, a prominence there, a spike around 1.5, 2K. That was their bright. Whereas to me, and I'm not saying that I'm the only one, but I come from an audio engineering background and I have very good hearing for 54 years old. And this is my gig. I do this. I listen for things. To me, the upper mid-range is great and very necessary, but it's the 5K stuff that's the high end. So you guys want to know which speaker is which? Before I tell you that, here's the thing that I did not put in that in the videos, because it would just been a big bunch of information which would seem to invalidate the whole thing. The Alessandro was a speaker that had many hours of playing time on it, whereas the Warehouse G12C and the ET65 were both brand new out of the box, so they have not broken in at all. So while I thought it was still representative, I know for a fact that both those speakers, if I could have had 6 weeks of gigging on them, would have sounded better, because they do sound better after they've broken in. That's a real thing with speakers because it's a mechanical movement. It's a mechanical diaphragm, and as it moves, it opens up. The glue loosens up, et cetera, et cetera. So the ET65 in my shop cab, which has been played on for years and years now, sounds better than the brand new out-of-the-box ET65. But my shop cab is a very large volume 2x12, which would be an unfair comparison to a deluxe reverb cabinet, which was the core of this. And it'd be very difficult to have the mic in precisely the same location on a large 2x12 as it was on the deluxe reverb. As you might have seen in the video, I just put some tape down so that I could move the cabs in the same spot and not move the microphone. So, that said, while the warehouses were not at their best in comparison to the Alessandro, I do think that the overall characteristics of the speakers were still represented pretty accurately. So in all three tests, speaker A was the Alessandro GA-SC64, which is a really good sounding speaker, especially in a deluxe reverb cabinet, because the cabinet does not have a lot of low end, and that kind of works. So you're not missing the low end because it has a lower mid emphasis rather than a true fundamental for things. The ET65, you could really hear that on that little bit of Wind Cries Mary, has an octave below the Alessandro. So if you really want the full range, that was there on the warehouses, much more than the Alessandro. I like all three speakers for different things. I think if you're doing a very clean Stratty kind of thing, the G12C is just perfect. It's very C12N with a Strat kind of Fender sound. The Alessandro's got a lot of mid-range punch. It really sits perfectly in a lot of contexts, as does the ET65, but they have the ET65 is not a scooped speaker, but it's not as prominent. It's a little bit flatter. So think of it as this is the ET65 is the midpoint, and the G12C is scooped, and the Alessandro has got upper mid-range peak. So all three are really good. For a long time, the Alessandro was out of stock from my suppliers, but that's a speaker I'll be recommending now that it's in stock regularly after the whole COVID thing. I will be recommending that as a very good option to players. I also know that the Eminence Texas Heat is a really nice choice for tele players in a deluxe reverb. The other thing about that comparison was that, as you saw, and you can see in the thumbnail for this video, I did not adjust the amp to make any speaker sound better. I knew that if I were to dial in, to change the knobs so that this speaker was at its best, someone else would say, oh, that speaker would have sounded so much better if you hadn't done that. I don't like those knob settings, or would think that I was trying to make one speaker sound better than another. So I thought leaving the amp just set to noon revealed the differences in the speaker. Now, if you found one was too bright or not bright enough, you could adjust that. If you wanted more or less mids, you could adjust that. If you wanted more or less low end, you could adjust that. Like on the ET65, if I wanted that to sound more like the Alessandro, I would have turned the bass down to just about 4, a little bit 4. Just probably a little bit lower than 4. And I've got an added mid-range knob on the back of that amp. I left it at 6.8K precisely. I could turn that up to about 9K, and those upper mids would have come through, et cetera, et cetera. So, Lou, if you're not getting audio, you may not be live. Make sure that there's a button on the screen where you can choose it to be live. You may be a few minutes before. So the real solution is to have cabs with multiple cabs and multiple speakers. But as a rule of thumb, if you want just one speaker for a deluxe reverb, it's really hard to beat the ET65, the Alessandro, and the Celestion Creamback 65. Those are three. If you're not happy with that, something else is wrong with you. So I will update the descriptions of all those videos after this chat, so people will be able to get that information. I wasn't trying to make some mystery for the sake of clicks, but I think that if people knew what they were listening to when they were listening to it, they would form opinions based on what their preconceptions were rather than what they're actually hearing. And I know for a fact that a lot of people's preconceptions in the comments was very wrong. It was a lot of work to do that test, to get that set up so everything is, the variables were all controlled. I did not have time to do a higher gain test with the 335. I'll do that down the road. I think I'm going to order the Alessandro, and I need to have like a 1x12 with that, and a 1x12 with maybe the ET65, because the 2x12 is just too big an advantage over the deluxe reverb cabinet. Anyway, let's get to people's questions, and I will, including yours, Sonny Silversmith, about Sun Studios. I have that T-shirt in the actually my wife has that T-shirt now at Shrink. I need to get another one. I do like to have a couple of Memphis Music T-shirts for these things. Haven't done it in a while. So let me put this up here as a reminder before we get started, and I'm going to try to remember to do these every once in a while since I don't have an admin here. So let's go up to the top here and see if I can get to questions. Sebastian BC 77. Yeah, it's a hell of a time to be on the planet. I feel you. Elbows up, Canada, Denmark, Greenland. The whole thing is just horrible. And speaking of which, my thoughts go out to those people in Myanmar and Thailand. So if you have friends or family there, or if you're watching from there, it's an awful time. Let's see. Back to the happy, friendly amp stuff. Thank you, Miro. Miro has an orange Rocker 30 that makes a pop in a PA each time I turn it on, off, or go to standby in 2 different venues. So you're connecting it to a direct box. Is a DI out? You may does that model amp have a ground lift on its DI out? If not, I imagine the sound guy would have a DI box with a ground lift. You may have some kind of ground interaction there. I don't know. If the amp doesn't pop when it's not connected to a PA, then the problem might be just the stage ground wiring, the electricity at the venue. There's a reason to have ground lifts on such things beyond loops. So I don't. If it doesn't do it when you power the amp on and off through the speaker, but it only does it through a front of house situation, I would talk to one of the front of house engineers at that venue and ask them if they have a lift. It could be a problem inside the amp, but I'd have to have the amp on the bench. I don't know that model well enough to say, oh yeah, it's this, it always happens. Or if yours is just particularly unlucky. I'm sorry. All right, going through the no audio stuff. Sorry about that. I often have the guitar mic on, and the guitar mic was last time I used it was through an amp which had no reverb, so I had a reverb plug-in, and I thought I'd muted the reverb bus, but I'd muted the master bus by mistake. So I usually do a test about 30 minutes before I go live, and I forgot today because it's been working so well. Let's see. Hey, David Kim 1221. Do I think a brown box will be helpful for Matchless Lightning and Bad Cat, Black Cat, or do these more modern amps not need those guys? You shouldn't need them as far as getting the heater voltage where they need to be. Primary job of a brown box is so that if you have an old amp that was designed when the mains were lower, you find the setting where your heaters, which are supposed to be 6.3 volts AC, are back to 6.3 volts AC. So you may have 120 volts coming out of the wall. I've got 121 right now, 122. So you may set it to 114 volts, and then your heaters are at 6.3, and the amp thinks it's 1962 all over again. But very specifically with the Matchless and Black Cat, those things tend to be on the cathode biased amps, biased so crazy high that you could get some benefit from running a brown box on them. Better to have a tech destupidify the cathode bias and not have them biased at, typically 19 watts per tube for a 12-watt tube. I'm not a huge fan of Matchless and Bad Cat as far as what they did to their customers and how the amps catch on fire. Once they're not catching on fire, they're very nice amps. But I would fix the root cause of that rather than use a brown box. In general, you don't need a brown box for any amp made after 1980, and most of the ones in the 70s are fine without it as well. Hey, 1217. I know the 68 Custom Pro Reverb has a solid-state rectifier, but how much different would it sound versus a Super Reverb if it's hooked up to a 4x10 cab? I love the sound of a Push Super, but own a Pro. Well, it's going to have a different output transformer, and a 4x10 cab is tricky in terms of the load. It would, a Super wants a 4 ohm load, and a Pro wants a 4 ohm load. Your Pro wants an 8 ohm load because it's designed for a 1x12. I always forget the difference between the new Pro and the real Pro. And a Super expects a 2 ohm load, and that's what a typical 4x10 cab gives. You could try it with a Hot Rod Deluxe or Hot Rod DeVille 4x12 cab. That would be fine with your 8 ohm load. And the big part of the Super Reverb is the speaker cab. But the speakers in a 4x10 HRD or Blues series are very different from the old CTS Alnicos in a Super Reverb. So just make sure that whatever test you run it with, whatever cab you use it with, is going to be the correct load. You don't want to run your amp with an 8 ohm output into someone's Super Reverb cabinet, because that's going to be a big mismatch. You could hurt your amplifier. The solid state rectifier is not going to really come into it. Solid state versus tube on that. The issue is going to be the reflected impedance seen by the output tubes on the primary of the output transformer, and whether the load is good. Does fan cooling a combo help extend tube life? It can, but it's not always as helpful as people think. It can cool it off to a small degree. Tubes generally are okay running very, very hot under normal conditions. The main thing is when you bring a fan into it, yes, you're going to be moving some air. Different degrees of air get moved depending on the fan's efficiency, speed, and what the airflow path is. Is there a place for air to come through to get there? Is there a place for air to go? But you are also going to be blowing dust into everything. Eventually, over time, you're going to be putting dust in places that would normally not ever get dusty. So an awful lot of the time, a cooling fan is not that useful and can introduce long-term problems. So SVT, sure. AC30, not really that helpful. If other things in the AC30 are taken care of, mainly like on an old JMI where people often do the fans because things run so hot. Well, you need to get 50 hertz, not 60 hertz. That transformer was not designed for 60 hertz, but that gets beyond most people's price point. Hey, did Amnesia, how come the 65 Deluxe Reverb reissue sounds muddy and flat compared to the 64 hand-wired? I have both hooked up to identical 1x12 cabs with the V30s. Well, I don't know why you would think that. The 65 Deluxe Reverb reissue should not sound muddy and flat. In fact, it's a better sound than the 64 hand-wired because it's not as noisy. And the amp I used for all those speaker comparisons the past 2 days was a 65 reissue Deluxe Reverb. Now, granted, I modded it, but the mods were not things which changed the sound of the amp. The mods were things to lower the noise floor and increase longevity, moving some hot stuff around to the octal sockets like I've discussed. But the core sound was not changed. It does not need to change. The core sound of that amp is very good. Now, you may have a bad tube in your 65 Deluxe Reverb reissue. You could have it biased incorrectly. There are a lot of things that could cause that, but it's not that the 65 sounds muddy and flat. And the 64, I mean, it sounds so bad in stock form, I don't know that that's a basis for comparison for anything. Hey, Brent St. Or wants an amp after leaving the digital world and want tubes and an effects loop. I have $2,500. Recommend one for great cleans that takes pedals well. Look at the Surbella, Surbella. I think you'd find that right up your alley, and you'd have some change left over. Do I have a preferred ground lift or hum canceling unit when running multiple amps? I think my PC is adding noise to my bedroom lines. You want to be very, very careful. You don't want to lift the safety ground of the amps. If you're running to multiple amps, you want to use an isolated transformer for, say, amp A and amp B at the same time. Amp B, you run through an isolation transformer that lifts the ground on the audio connection. That's the way to do it. You don't ever want to disconnect safety grounds. Cell Zealot says, I knew A was the Alessandro. Well, there are those who were sure that A was the warehouse, and there are those who said they did not ever like the Alessandro, therefore they thought it would be B. There are those who do not like the warehouse. All warehouse speakers sound bad, and that's why they like speaker B, which was, of course, the warehouse. So I tried to take preconceptions and hearing with your eyes out of the equation. Hey, Cheese Pizza. Currently building a 5F1. Went with the Jupiter 8-inch Alnico speaker. Cab is back ordered, but I have all the other bits. Can I still test the final build sounds cab? You can. Just know that is going to sound like shit. A speaker that's not mounted in a cabinet, just on the bench, it's safe. It's just going to sound terrible. Speakers are designed to work fixed to a plane. First of all, the speaker can't really move as intended if it can also just push it, the frame. The frame has to be rigid. Second of all, it needs a baffle and some kind of enclosure to really develop more of the frequency response. That's a very deep subject. But yes, as far as testing, it's fine. And if it's noisy, you'll hear noise, but it won't sound good no matter what you do until you get that speaker into a cabinet. Hey, Christopher Butler, I am very well. Hope you are as well. Hey, John Newton. I don't use silver micas very often because I don't think they're worth. There are two variants of silver micas. There are the generic ones that just say SM that everyone seems to use. They're garbage. They fail. They're relatively cheap, but not that cheap. It's a waste of money. And the good silver micas, the ones which say CDM or Sozo, if you want to spend $8 for them, cost $3 to $8. They're expensive, and I prefer the sound of 1 kilovolt ceramics, the Class 2, the 562R series from Vishay most of the time, and those are considerably less expensive. So they sound better. They're more authentic to the original components used in the 50s and 60s, and they're less expensive. So why would I use silver micas? Now, if I were doing a hi-fi thing, I might choose a silver mica. Silver mica has certain attributes. I might choose a polystyrene for certain hi-fi things because of certain attributes those caps can have in certain parts of certain circuits. It's not a blanket statement. But those things are so expensive and so fragile that I don't mess with them in amps that get tossed in the back of a pickup truck. Well, in Dawson, that mid-push on the Alessandro can make it sound a little bit ugly, a little bit sore thummy by itself. In a band context, though, that really helps you get heard. That's a long discussion, but it is not a bedroom sound, but it recorded so nicely. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. Have I been to Sun Studios? Yeah, I've been to Sun Studios. I have friends who do the tours there, and I have restored most of the amplifiers they have at Sun Studios. They got 3 deluxes that I've done, and a B15 and a few other old amps. How did he sound live in 53? I don't know. I was not there. Imagine... what's the best way to put this? He didn't do a lot of stuff at Sun, and everything done at Sun at that time had a particular sound. Now, Elvis was a very talented kid. He had a very good backing band there. Scotty Moore, especially, was just phenomenal. But the way that they were doing things at Sun at that time, and the way that room was built with a linoleum floor and the old asbestos acoustic tiles, and the recorder they're using, everything had a very compressed, squashed sound with a lot of slapback. And it was a very exciting sound coming through an AM radio speaker. But I don't think that was, we can have any idea what Elvis really sounded like at that year, that he was a good singer. If you come to Memphis, the Sun Studios tour is very cool. It's much better than going to Graceland. You'll also learn about Howlin' Wolf and other musicians who recorded at Sun Studio. And I particularly recommend the Stax Museum of American Soul Music. It's where the old Stax Studios was. And it's not just about Stax, it's about Motown and Muscle Shoals and Atlantic. And it's a phenomenal deep dive into the history of rock and roll and blues and R&B and soul music in America. And I recommend both those way over Graceland. Graceland's just spending a lot of money to see a bunch of tacky shit. No one's life that stopped in 1977 would hold up very well. You know, Elvis, if he'd lived, he eventually would have fired that interior decorator. But, you know, the 70s were a hell of a time. Imagine everyone thinking that your entire life was zebra skin and avocado fridges. Yeah, Jeff Motter. I really like the SC64. I really like the ET65. It'd be good to have one of each. Suede named his son Stax. All right, Suede, you win. That is cool. Or your son is. What Weber speakers for Deluxe Reverb 65 reissue? Well, the two Webers I would recommend to most players would be the 12F125, which is a ceramic speaker, not unlike the Oxford that they would have had back in the day, or the 65-watt Blue Dog, which is the Alnico. That Steve Selvage's 73 Deluxe Reverb has got that. That's a real nice sounding speaker with the Deluxe Reverb. It's a bit different, but those are the two Webers that I would recommend to most people with a Deluxe Reverb, or the 12F150 if you want a little more headroom. Do I have any knowledge about decoupling the power supply and ground of my TL071 op amp? Gets real noisy on my breadboard. Well, first of all, things get noisy on breadboards, so they aren't necessarily going to be noisy in a true circuit, because you can have all kinds of excess lengths on a breadboard and lots of spaghetti, and there's not going to be any shielding present. But in general, I don't know whether you're doing a unipolar or bipolar supply, but in general, you want to have a distinction made between shielding, DC negative, and AC negative signal ground, because sometimes your DC mid voltage is equivalent to AC ground, and shielding needs to be separated in its role from that. But in general, when designing an op amp circuit, I like to have 100 nanofarad 50 volt, 63 volt ceramic cap to either to ground or to the half voltage, depending on the circuit setup, right at pin 4 and pin 8 on a typical op amp. So there's a very, very localized filtering, and as close physically as possible, which again, breadboarding doesn't always work. Doug Wampler has got some real good breadboarding videos up. And one of the things he discusses is when you're breadboarding, you're going to have high noise. And you've got to learn to listen through that to see, hey, this is because of this noise is going to be here because I'm breadboarding, or this noise is because there's a problem. You got to develop some experience. So don't sweat it too much. And I'm not sure why you're using a TL071. That thing's pretty dated at this point. I mean, it's fine. There's circuits that use it, but I think there are better things to build with or design. If you're designing, there are better things to design with. If you're just copying, just copy. That's fine, and have fun with it. But don't worry about breadboard noise too much. What is my opinion of the Fender 57 Handwired Deluxe reissue? They exist. I have seen them. I would not recommend that anyone buy them because for the price you can get so many real amps that are much better made. But, my opinion is they exist. And as long as it doesn't say Eric Clapton on it, you could afford it. But it's not a... There are so many better 5E3 Deluxe builds out there for the same price or less as anything that the Fender Custom Shop does, or Fender in general. Go to Victoria if you just want to pretty much straight up what they built in 1957 for real, though. I don't know. Did Amnesia, my Amplified Nation Triple S amp is my number one, but I can't part with my three Fenders, a 65, a 64 hand-wired, and if I reverb still other sound as well. Is there a good way to figure out which is lemon? The 64 hand-wired is lemon. Sell it to some schlub who buys into the marketing stuff, but, it's not as good an amp as your others. Hey, got a mic. Thank you very much. What is involved with converting Marshall JMP 1987 from 220 volts to 110 volts? Well, either you need to get a new power transformer for the amp, and that's relatively simple, or some Marshalls, including the 87, already had the different primaries where you can just rewire it from 220 to 110, and there's lots of documentation on that. Or you can just get a step-down transformer so you can keep the amp wired to 220, and just actually do a step up. So you'd be providing 120 and giving it 240. But I believe most of the later JMP 87s, you could wire the primary to be 220 or 110. But off the top of my head, I don't know what wires to tell you to do, or that I would tell most people how to do it in a context like this, even if I knew it like the back of my hand. Whenever I get one of those, I have to look at the schematic. And I mean this nicely, this is not about you, Got a Mic. This is for anyone asking similar questions. If you're asking questions about this, odds are the schematic already shows the answer. And so that tells me that if you're asking questions like this, you should not be the one doing this kind of work. But that said, I would either ask a tech to either see if the primary can be rewired for different voltage use internally, which usually it can, or just get a step-up transformer and don't modify the amp because you won't need to. The rest of this stuff is exactly the same. And again, I mean that really nicely. Just matter of fact, there are things I do in my car. There are things I don't do in my car. Sometimes I don't have the knowledge. Sometimes I don't have the tools. Sometimes I don't have the computer that the car needs to talk to. But I'll change an oil filter and I'll put in brake fluid and stuff. You got to know your limitations. Hey, did Amnesia again? When I turn a tube off, when meaning to turn it standby, how long should I wait to flick it back on? I've read amps don't like to be turned on and off rapidly. It'd be very surprising to me if you could turn that thing on and off rapidly enough to hurt the amp. You might wear out your power switch, but if I turn it off and I meant to put it in standby, I'll just turn it back on. It's still hot. It's the thermal cycling that's not good for it, but it's already going to be warm, so you're not going to have much thermal cycling. And switches wear out. You just used up one of your switch. Your of the 10,000 times you could have used that switch, you used up one. You wasted one of 10,000. Someone smarter than me can tell you what percentage that is. Hey, Shaolin Wolf, should you use standby with your 1977 Music Man 65 amp? I believe you should. I believe the amp is solid state rectification. I don't recall for sure, but I'm pretty sure that's got a solid state rectifier. Yeah, use standby on that. Hey, Brad, you absolute legend. Thank you for joining us. Of course, you joined us 20, 30 minutes ago. I'm just seeing it now because it's hard for me to See, I've got the current stuff here, and I've got the stuff I'm replying to here. And if you cross streams, it's bad. That would be bad. Sean just picked up a Yorkville Bassmaster 200T 2x10 with tweeter. Sings beast, but it works great. Just some scratchy pots. Very good. Do not use WD-40 for those pots. But there's a wide range of good contact cleaners and pot cleaners on the market. Just don't use WD-40, no matter what Bubba's brother-in-law says. Oh, Steve Ramon, that's tricky. Can I tell you where to put the second set of resistors that I don't show in your video? Well, the Classic 30, two of the EL84s do not have screen grid resistors. Two of them do. What I do, and the same thing Brad does, and Brad has shown this, is I will cut the trace going to the screens that do not have them, and then I'm allowed. That gives me the ability to add them. But it's kind of a jerry-rigged solution. It's an imperfect solution to a problem that PV created for no damn good reason. They saved $1 on two resistors, but I think Brad's got a video up where he shows that pretty well. Brad, if you're still here, if you want to put a link to your video, Steve Ramon, Brad does excellent work, and he has shown that I think better in a video than I have. It's very doable. It comes to mind because I was scrolling yesterday and Brad's video on the Classic 30, how good can we make this, came up. And he made it good. And saw the dark glass video. Brilliance! Why do Gibson LPs have the jack sleeve wired to the three-way switch? Seems to work fine wired to the pot case. Because the signal is running from the three-way switch to the output jack. That is, the pickups go to the pots. Each pot has its own tone circuit, and then it goes to the switch, and from the switch to the output jack. That's just the way they do it. You could wire the jack to the pot case instead. That's fine if you want, but since they typically use a braided run from the switch to the output jack, it makes sense to do it all in one, and that way you also are shielding the switch itself. So when you touch the switch, the metal on the switch, you're not going to put noise into the system. You're not going to inject noise into your signal because the switch body is shielded. Is shielded. It's ground. Cool. Yeah, Steve Ramon. Brad just put his classic Delta Series Part 1 video up, and you can see him doing the screen grids precisely as I would. I think we even use the same resistors. He does almost everything I do, just does it shorter. Let's see. I have a Princeton reverb that occasionally just red plates 6v6 closest to the phase inverter, Alex S. says. Changed to a new set of tubes and started red plate again. Possibly the 10 nanofarad coupling caps or 220K. Well, Alex, it could be, Princeton, it's going to be 0.1, not 0.01 microfarad coupling caps. Yeah. There are three things I would look at with that symptom. Much more likely to be the coupling cap leaking than the 220K. It is possible that you have a bad 220K bias leak resistor. It's just very rare. If you have, I don't know what year Princeton you have, because it's not that usual for the caps in the 60s Princetons to leak, but it's possible. But I would look to see if you have an issue with leakage at that cap. And the best way to do that is power the amp up without the 6v6s present. And at the moment you power it up, see what the voltage is at pin 5 of each octal socket, and then check and leave the amp on and check again 10 minutes later. And if they start off and they're both at like negative 42 volts, and then 10 minutes later, the one on the left that doesn't red plate is at negative 42, but the one on the right is at negative 30. That means you've got positive DC leaking in there, and it's probably that coupling cap. Occasionally, and this happened on a deluxe reverb to me not long ago, occasionally you can have arcing built up inside the octal socket, and that can cause a screen to go wrong, or it can cause the grid to have DC voltage leaking into the socket. And again, I don't know what year yours is. So first, see if it's present without the output tubes, and if it's definitely, hey, yeah, the bias is getting hotter, is getting closer to zero, so say from negative 40 to negative 30 over 10 minutes, then those are just for instance numbers, but that's the direction you need to look at. Then it's a problem at that grid there. Then disconnect the wire to that grid, if possible, depending on which model you have, and repeat that test. And if it continues to drop even with the connection to the cap not there, then you probably have a bad socket. If it stays stable with the cap disconnected, then it's probably a bad cap. These are both very inexpensive things. A capacitor's $2. A new output socket is about $3. So you'll be okay. But definitely find out what the root cause is, because you're going to have a $5 fix or lose $80 of 6v6s each time. Speaker recommendation for 65 Princeton reissue jazz low gain stuff. Thanks. ET10. Warehouse ET10 is just perfect for that. Another good choice for that would be, for a little bit more, would be the Celestion G10 Gold. My only concern on that is I'm not sure if the gold version has, I'm trying to think. All right, the gold won't work in an old Princeton, but it'll work in the reissue, because the reissue only has the 4 screws. It doesn't have the 8 studs. Okay. Some Celestions don't fit in fenders because of they only have openings for 4 as opposed to 8 connections. Sorry, but the reissue will be fine. Let me pop this back up here for those who did not see it earlier, because I'm seeing that in the chat a little bit, and it's good to have. Let's see. Matambale says, so then you put the filters on the intake, and then that filter turns to powder or goo or both? I'm not sure what you're referring to there. I don't like when my filters turn to powder or goo or both. Hey, Des Vega. Stupid question. Well, let's see if I have a stupid answer that matches. I have a pretty good stash of stupid answers. My Strat's bridge and mid pickups are in phase with each other, and middle and neck are as well. Okay, that means that your neck and bridge pickups are also in phase. I want to add a neck on switch. They're already in phase. It's if your bridge and middle are in phase with each other, and your middle and neck are in phase with each other, that means your bridge and your neck are in phase with each other. Absolutely. It's worth asking. Yeah. So it was not a stupid question. I applaud you for finding out for sure before you make a mod. Yeah. I wouldn't do a neck on switch. It's a very permanent mod to the pick guard, and you may find yourself never using it. Get the what do you call it? The no load 250K blend pot from Mojo Tone, and do that. You look up blend pot Strat neck pickup. It just lets you blend the neck pickup in instead of the Gilmore switch thing. You just do it by having that on one of the tone pots. The other one becomes a global tone. And if a year from now you realize, hey, I thought I'd use that a lot more than I do, but I just don't end up using it, you can put it back to stock, and you've not made a hole in anything. And it's a lot easier to use than finding a tiny little switch on stage. You just roll down that blend pot, and then here comes the neck pickup. And you also have control of a little bit or all of it or anything in between, whereas the switch is just all or nothing. Do I have any tips for building a 5E3 as a head? Well, it's kind of be the same as building it for a combo pretty much. I mean, if you wanted to go all out, you could do it tubes up like a Marshall, which is how Marshall developed the J245 from the Bassman, which is the J245 was a head version of a Fender Bassman. That's why the layout's exactly the same, only upside down, but they had panels made, so you can't use a 583 faceplate upside down and have it be legible. But other than that, there's no concerns. There are reverb amps that are tricky to do as a head, but a 583 is simple. Thank you, Joseph White. I appreciate that. Is speaker coil rub possible if only at certain high volume and particular notes, or am I barking up the wrong tree looking for my buzz in my new speaker? No, you can have very minor or incipient speaker voice coil rub that only reveals itself at certain frequencies and certain volumes. Eventually, it's going to be, it's going to get to the point where it's going to deteriorate and it'll always be there. You could also have a tear in a speaker. You could also have loose hardware in the cabinet or something resonating sympathetically inside. Cabinet construction can be very difficult to nail everything down, particularly in old funky stuff using light materials typically from the 50s and early 60s. I'm looking at you, Valco. But let me show you guys how to test for voice coil rub, because I've got one here that does it. Let me get one from the other room. Let me take this stupid thing off. All right, so here is an old Eminence Alnico 10. This was a very good speaker when it was new. Let's see if I can do this so you can hear it. Make sure I'm not touching anything I don't want to touch. Take my hands like this. Usually I would do this with the speaker down, but I'm doing it so you can see it. You just kind of, I'm going to let you, hopefully the mic will pick this up. Let's see. Tricky to do. Does that come through? Can you hear that? So that's this thing sounds awful. Its mate, which sounds good, this was a 2x10 in a Vibrolux, doesn't do that when I do the same thing. Now, normally I would put it face up like this. Let's see if I can get you to see it. Well, it'd be like this on a table, and I'd be very carefully pushing evenly, just moving the cone straight up and down, and you can hear it kind of go. That's the rubbing voice coil. Now here's an old Oxford. This is one of the other signs of a bad speaker. Someone fixed it with whiteout, I think. So, there's your lesson for today, kids. Whiteout is a bad sign. Where were we? Yeah, you could also have cone cry. Let's see. Cell Zealot got a heritage guitar. Cool. Enjoy that. Did amnesia. I think the bias on my deluxe is set to 19. Is that much too low? 19 what? Let me call up something for you guys. Give me a second. It's worth it. I'm going to show you the part that I want to show you. And just that part. Let's see here. Where's my option? All right, I want to show you just this. All right. This is a deluxe reverb I just biased the other day. So 12.3 is the wattage on the tube. I've called it push and I have pull and push, then tubes 1. If this were a twin or something, on the push side, the tubes would be 2, and the push side, the tubes would be 2. So, a quad. And with a twin, the tube wattage would be 30, not 12.3, et cetera, et cetera. 25 if it were an EL34. You get the gist. Pri-R, that's primary resistance. That's the DC resistance between the primary and the center tap of the output transformer on each side. So 205.2, 206.9, 120 volts wall mains voltage. The negative bias voltage, so negative VB, was negative 39 volts. I have it at 39 because it's easier to type 39 than negative 39. That's a reference for me. And then the plate voltage was 413. And I can look at this little chart here, and I know that based on the numbers I typed in, the variables I typed in, I know that 50% is going to be 3.06 and 3.08. 70% is going to be 4.28, 4.31. 60 is right in between. And E is the actual voltage drop that I'm measuring with the meter. So 3.47 and 3.3. And if you look over here at percentage, that correlates to 56.8% and 53.6%. So these things are matched within about 3%. That's really good. Now I, milliamp, that's the actual current per tube. 16.9 milliamps and 15.9 milliamps. And the dissipation, at idle is 6.98 and 6.59, which is the same thing. A different way of saying 56.8%, 53.6%. That's a good starting point area for a deluxe reverb. Now let's look at this I, because he was asking about 19. If I were to say, all right, well, 70 would be 4.28 and 4.31, let's just change these to 4. 19.5, 19.3 milliamps. And he was asking if 19 is much too low. Well, in general, you would think that 19 is on the verge of too high if all the other conditions are the same. But that would only be the case if his output transformer has the same or very similar primary DCR resistance between DC resistance, not DCR resistance, DC resistance between each side of the primary and the center tap. That's the physical windings of the primary of the transformer. And he has the same wall voltage. And he has the same kind of 6V6, because if these were JJ 6V6S's, which are 14 watt tubes, not 12.3 watt tubes, then all that mileage would vary. And I don't know whether his 19 milliamps is probably not pure plate current like mine are. He probably is measuring with bias right or other similar bias measuring probes. That's going to include the screen current, which I've not shown here. So this at 19.5 and 19.3, we're at just below, don't do that, 65% there. I'll just change it to 4.3 on each of these. Now 19 is below that, but this is just the plate current. His measurement would also include screen current. You can kind of think of screen current as adding another 5%. So if I undo those changes I made, go back to where the amp was, and add 5% to that, was 61. Well, someone out there measured that times 1.05. So I think 19 milliamps is probably pretty realistic to be about a 60 to 65% dissipation. So I don't think it's too low. But you can't ask questions about, is 19 too low? I don't know what your 19 is. And this will also vary. I could have a pair of tubes come in that work, but they're just very weak, and I would have to really decrease the negative voltage on the bias supply to get to the same bias amount. Might have a very different plate voltage as a result of that. The B plus can change an awful lot. So there are a lot of factors to this kind of stuff that most forum posts don't take into account. And I'm not making fun of you, Did Amnesia. If you don't know this stuff, that's a perfectly valid question to ask. But I'm going to assume him at 19 milliamps, and that's you're measuring that with your bias right, and you're probably closer to 18 milliamp plate and 1 milliamp current, something like that, and you're probably absolutely fine. I think it's time. Yeah, we're right up at the top of the hour. We're going to take our first 7-minute intermission. Then I'll try to get back to everyone's questions. So I'll see you guys. All right, where were we? Let's see. Let's see. Jay can't talk today. J. Dave Foster has got a 78 bandmesh reverb with one of the power transformer bolts partially stripped. I have a replacement. The original bolt will turn, but will not come out. Any suggestions? It'll turn, but won't come out of the transformer. I assume you mean. Well, they're usually shellacked at the top, and they can be a bitch to break the old shellac bond. Sometimes a cautious and judicious use of a hammer can help with that. Other than that, one of the tricks you can do is just use the old bolt, and wherever the strip area is, it's usually going to be a pretty narrow notch where the threads are just gone where the old screw was. You can just use like 2 Keps nuts until you catch a bit of fresh threading. You can just stack 2 or 3 nuts on top of each other and catch some fresh thread. That'll often work, but sometimes the shellac goes, really adheres to the top, and it's just really hard to break that free. Thank you, Joe. Well, that was the amplifier, singular. That was a big part of it. One amplifier, same exact performance with the looper pedal, same mic location within probably a 32nd of an inch variation. As not fully scientific because I didn't have a robot placing the cabinet in exactly the same location, but as accurate as 4 strips of blue painter's tape on the floor would allow. And the knobs were all set the same. Guten Tag to yourself, BC Electronics. Bienvenue, willkommen, come on in. Is it bad to run all my amps and pedals off the same surge protector? It's the same as running them all off the same leg of your house anyway. It's fine. As long as the surge protector is rated for the total current present. Make sure you got a 15 amp or 20 amp surge protector for professional use. If you draw more current than the wall will allow, the circuit breaker will trip in your house. But if you can also overload a surge protector by having, if you have 12 amps being drawn through a 10 amp surge protector, the surge protector will fail, but your 15 amp wall supply won't trip, and that's when things can get hot. But in general, just figure out, how many amps. Your pedals are going to draw. The entire pedal board is going to draw 1 amp, maybe 2 amps typically. 5 if you've got all kinds of digital modelers, and your amp is going to draw whatever the mains fuse is per amp. So say you've got 2 deluxe reverbs, that's 2 amps each, and a pedal board with a Strymon, so you got a total draw of 6 amps, and you've got a 15 amp circuit breaker going to a 15 amp circuit in your house. You're fine. No, avoid Wang's amplification. They're garbage. You get what you pay for, and that is a free lunch device. Okay, Captain Grumpus. Yeah, the speaker cable on the 65 reissues, all the reissue Fender amps, all the Hot Rods Blues series, they're all that same black plastic molded integrated plug / cable, and it's terrible. I replaced them with a Switchcraft plug and some higher quality wire. It's inexpensive and certainly good to do. I've just had too many of them fail where they will lose a connection because the black plastic is not that robust and the wires inside can break. Thank you, Steve Ramon. Appreciate that. Greenback in a deluxe reverb 65 is it too low watt? Yeah, your greenback won't last very long. It's a 25 watt speaker, and it's rated at 22 watts. It's really a 30 watt amp if you push it, and your speaker will die, and it can take out your amplifier with you. I'm not building any custom amps at the moment. I'm too backed up. Thank you, though, Steve Singleton. Appreciate that. I'd love to be able to just say, yes, I do that now. But I've gotten so burned. Last time I started to do that, and I will get that series made at some point. That's when COVID happened, and everything went crazy. Let's see. Hey, Dan Broch, I can't tell you that the valve states are worth owning. They're not junk, but they're not great. They have certain sounds that work for certain styles. It's just that when they fail, the cost of repair can approach the cost of buying a new one. And a lot of the older solid state power transistors are no longer available or not reliably available. So, if you got one and you like it, that's cool. Just they have a lifespan, and many of them are approaching that. Yeah, it wasn't Midnight Train. It was I should know this. Talk about it all the time. Perkins. You wouldn't happen to have any more Japanese plums or any other exotic fruits from around the globe? What was that train? What was that movie? Mystery Train. Duh. Speaking of Elvis, Mystery Train. All the locations in Mystery Train I know very well. Some of them aren't here anymore, but most of them are. So if you guys come to town, I'll take you to the arcade. Let's see. Thank you, Fred R. I appreciate that. Mystery Train is an independent movie. Came out, what, about 1990? For those of you who haven't seen it, maybe a little earlier, Mystery Train. It's fantastic. And it's got Steve Buscemi, and it's got Joe Strummer. And it's got, as I referenced, it's got Screaming Jay Hawkins in it. Totally fantastic movie. I had the opportunity to build a dream vintage Marshall half-stack, Mr. A.C. Angus Young D.C. says. I have 4 impeccable 1966 20-watt GM12 greenbacks, 50-watt bases, leads in J1045, vintage versus reissues, local vintage cost. I'm not sure what your question is. Should you buy a vintage or a reissue? If you can afford for your dream vintage Marshall half-stack, you should go with the vintage if you can. The vintage, the reissues can be made good, but the iron in them is not great, and the power transformers often need replacing, and they're just they need a lot of help to get to where just if you can afford to get a vintage one and have it restored, you're going to be in a sweet place. Steve Thompson, schematic notes for 68 CDR says bias set to 24 milliamp at factory, comes to approximately 73%. Comments, I don't know if it does come to 73%, because so much of, like I said, so many bias probes, etc., are including screen voltage. Second of all, I totally ignore whatever Fender recommends for any of that stuff. Some of their recommendations are just insane in both directions, cold and hot, and I just ignore them and I do them the right way. I don't need Fender to tell me how to make a Fender work. It's Leo and Don Randall and the guys have long since left the building. Hell, it's not even the same building. Hey, Worship Journal. Just picked up a Korg Era AC36 top boost with Vox Blues. It says the TBX. Cool. It's your first tube amp. Watch my video on them. What are some pretty easy things to look for, possibly to do to get it running optimally? Well, it's a tricky amp because it has so many factory noise issues. It has ground loops built in from the factory. So, there are things that you cannot do, that you should not have to do, but would make that amp a lot better if Vox had built it right to begin with. All the TBX series are essentially prototypes that were sold to the public before being made into a final sellable, viable, good option. But because these slapdash prototypes were made in the UK, and they were the last ones to be made in the UK, people pay a lot extra money for that, which is freaking awful. As it's the beginning of the end of Marshall. Korg and Vox, Marshall and Vox were made by the same division of Korg at the time. And the same problems on the TBX are the same problems on the same period Marshalls that were coming out of that factory. As far as things that you can do, make sure your jacks are clean. Make sure your jacks are secure, but don't over tighten them because the plastic nuts will break. Make sure all your pot hardware is tight. Make sure that the tubes are good. Don't be surprised if you need to give it new EL84s from time to time because the thing can run a bit hot. Be very, very cautious changing preamp tubes because the preamp tube sockets in that series are not that well built, and the pins in them can get mangled if the tube's not aligned perfectly. It is a very good sounding amp once all the ground loops are removed from it. The factory installed ground issues are taken out, but it has aspects which are very fragile, which is frustrating. I think for the price those things go for, they should be as good as a JMI, that they're just nowhere close. Oh, Mike M, don't worry about the screens running higher than the plates in a deluxe reverb. That's part of the sound of a deluxe reverb. The deluxe reverb was a cheat. Leo got away punishing 6v6s well beyond what the data sheet said it could do, and they tend to do fine, and it's rare that it's the screens that go out in a deluxe reverb. Don't worry about it. In theory, the deluxe reverb shouldn't work. In theory, none of the Fender reverb circuits pushing that 12AT7 should work, but they tend to work. So, let's see. Jeff Dorman and Steve Thompson, I see that, and I will thank you much more appropriately when the time comes. I try to do this in the sequence things come in, but I just want you to know that I do see that. And it means a lot to me. Thank you both very much. Let's see, almost, okay. All right, guys, I really, really would appreciate if there's some more question marks put before the questions, because I've got like 4 or 5 in a row here that don't have that, and it makes it hard for me to see them because at this point in the chat, people are talking to each other, which is great. I'm glad that you're all talking to each other, but it makes it hard for me to see the questions. Remember, I don't have someone sitting here with an iPad finding the questions and putting them on the screen for me. I'm doing this all live without a net. So, Holy Mountain's got a 74 DR504. That's a high watt, fantastic amp. It picks up crazy RFI on certain inputs depending on how the jack's sitting in the plug. What's the best solution for this? Well, all of the late 60s and 70s high watts, those input jacks are terrible. They lose mechanical strength, and the ground schemes vary a lot in that period as to where things are going. I have found that of the jacks on the market today, I like to replace the input jacks on high watts, vintage amp high watts, with Amphenol brand TRS stereo plugs. So from the outside, they look like the old Cliff jacks. Cosmetically, from the outside, they're the same. Functionally, on the inside, they look much the same. But because they have a much tighter tolerance than the old Cliff Jacks, and they have it's a TRS stereo. The ring connection helps grab the sleeve, so the sleeve is double reinforced. It really makes a huge difference in the performance. And beyond that, it can be where the input ground is. In general, in an amplifier, you want to have the ground for the input section made as close to the input jacks as possible to keep RFI out. But specifically with the old jacks used on high watts, especially since high watt sometimes had very thick panels. On the stock jacks, the cable is just barely held in place, so you have a very iffy connection between the tip and the surface it's supposed to contact. So cleaning them can't help. Replacing them is better. And it's a pain in the butt, but it's an inexpensive pain in the butt, at least as far as the jacks go. The labor, depending on what the tech charges to do that, can be, an hour, but it's well worth it. Hey, Mark. Yeah, there's a part 2 coming. I've got the amp almost all done. I've got all the cathode bypass caps changed out, and I've got the bias board rebuilt. You can't see that from this angle very well. I'm waiting for the board to arrive that lets me put in these nice radials like I did on the last 2 old Princetons that came in. And then this thing will sing. And I gotta send an invoice to the owner to get that replacement cab from Mojotone. That cabinet takes about a month and a half. So there's not a huge rush on this, but there will be a part 2. I've been waiting a week for the board to get here. I'm at the mercy of the modern post office. And then at the I'm at Mojotone's production schedule. So the amp will be done when it's done, and some things are out of my control. Let's see. Have I heard any of the new Mariah amps out of North Carolina? I have not, Taylor Nut. I have not. I am not totally familiar with Brunetti's. I think I've seen one or heard about them. Nothing really stuck in my mind about them. Thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. But no, I don't see a lot of Italian amps here. I don't recall if I've ever had in or seen a Brunetti. I don't think I have. I think I've heard about it. I have no opinion about a new hand-wired Vox AC15 with Alnico Blue. 1,800 is not a bad price for that, I suppose. But so I don't know what a new model is. I know up until the time you asked me that, I know the AC15 hand-wired series, that Fawn one, and I'm not a big fan of it. But I don't know if they have a new version. Hey, Strumbum, what's a good source for vintage style cloth covered wiring? You can get it at Mojotone. You can get it at HoffmanAmps.com. Both of those, pretty much the same stuff. Both are really great. 22 gauge solid core pushback. Anthony Mancini, I do have a video on that to some extent. I don't recall, but I know I do have one on that. I don't recall what it was called. Something about standby. And I don't know how good it was, because some of the videos from a few years ago, I'm like, I need to redo that. Maybe I need to redo the subject as well, because I keep getting asked about it a lot. Yeah, the build quality is not as good as it was in the 60s or 70s. It's approaching exactly where it was in 79, 80. But while I'm not a fan of Fender not doing the final touches and fully assembling the amps before they ship them, they are there. They're on the market. I advise buying them used so that Fender doesn't make any money off of it. But they're out there. There's thousands of functional, good condition reissue Fenders already existing. You can support a dealer or a local store or individual without furthering the Fender cash cow machine. You tighten some hardware and you got a great amp. They're really good amps that just weren't made as good as they should have been. And they didn't tighten the hardware. They used the crappiest filter caps in the world. Just stupid stuff. As Emmett, I think you're talking about the speaker comparison. Yeah, that Royer that's a cheat code for recording guitar. It just makes everything on my end so much easier. It sounds great. Hey, T777, you missed which speaker is which reveal from the past couple of days. That's at the beginning of the chat, though. You can catch that afterwards, or maybe someone will catch you up there. I don't know a good tech out in Bay Area specifically. Thank you very much. I have known some techs, great techs in that area who have retired since. Brad might be able to jump in on that, and if Frank is still here, he might know someone personally, though he's closer to LA. Hey, General Ethos. Well, the blackface and the silverface were almost the same amp up to about 76. In 76, the Pro Reverb, I think it was 76, the Pro Reverb started to become an ultra-linear model, which is very different from the previous ones. And there's nothing wrong with that, but a 78 is very, very different from a 66. But both those amps were essentially two 6L6 versions of twins. They were twin reverbs with half the power. So only 45 watts as opposed to 85 watts. Big, heavy 2x12s. The current one is a single channel, just one channel, not two channels, and it is a single 12. So it is a 40 watt 1x12 with reverb and tremolo. And it's pretty well built, and it has good reverb, and it has pretty good tremolo. It's basically the big brother to the deluxe reverb rather than being the little brother to the twin reverb, if that makes sense. And it has a lot of similarities to the original circuit, but not precisely. The way they do some switching stuff, the way they do some reverb stuff is different, but it gets you to a good place. I'm not opposed to the new 68 Pro Reverb. It's the only thing that they've put 68 on that I think is worth having. Hey, Adrian, good day to you, sir. Question if I have time. I have an old, large 6070s Tysco amp, and it's popping and crackling like a pork roast, even if I've switched it off. And I don't see the question. I'll look for it as we go through, Adrian. I assume there's a question coming up about it. But Brad here is just outside of Sydney, and he's going to have more experience. Is it Tasco or Tiesco? I'm thinking of Tiesco, which is an import brand here. But if it was different, and it is Tiesco, if it's Australia, if it's some Australian amp with which I'm unfamiliar, Brad would be the guy. Okay, you got push pot for the neck on. Okay, cool. Des Vega, that'll work just fine. I just didn't want you to drill a hole in the pick guard for a standard standalone switch, like lots of people on the internet do, because Gilmore had it done a long time ago. Gilmore doesn't use that setting very often, but his guitar has a switch in it. My recent Deluxe Reaper build has a microphonic input wire between the two 68K grid stubbers and pin 2 of V2. I've tried multiple known good 12x7 tubes with no change. What could be the issue? So you have the two 68Ks mounted at the input jacks or mounted at the tube socket. What I would suggest trying, if you're I don't know what wire you're using. Shielded wire is not all made the same. Some shielded wire is noisy and can be microphonic. I've got some videos up where I show this in a matchless guitar pedal, matchless hotbox, I think it was called, where all the shielded wire that Matchless had used was microphonic. And I replaced it with other shielded wire, which was totally not microphonic. Canare GS4 would probably be the easiest thing for most people to find. That's a really good small diameter cable that'll work beautifully for wiring inside an amplifier for that purpose. I use some RG363 or something. I can't remember the model number. I use a coax that I get from a bulk supplier. But it's harder to get and only sold in very large quantities. For most people, get 10 feet of Canare GS4 and be very happy, and it won't be microphonic. There are other shielded cables which are fine for low impedance stuff, microphones. But when used for high impedance stuff, like in a guitar amplifier, exhibit what they would call handling noise. You're hearing it as microphonics. So you can be doing everything right on paper, but still have the wrong shielded wire. So look in Canare GS4. G as in George, S as in Sam, 4 as in 4. All right, Christopher Butler, 25 years, owned a mismatched stereo 1x12 rig. How do you do okay, so two 1x12s. Okay. I was like, how do you have a stereo 1x12? Okay, sorry. All right, so you had a Pacific Woodworks EV, thiol port, one non-matching Sonic. Okay. All right, OCD hell. I'm with you there, Christopher. Just sniped a twin brother for the Pacific. Cool. Okay, you got Eminence Delta Pro. I have no experience with a Delta Pro 400 watt driver. You're there, Christopher. Your ears are going to be right. Whatever your ears say is the right answer. I've not tried that Eminence, and I don't know the EVTL 802 either. So I know the 12L and the 12M. So I am not going to have any answer better than what you're going to hear yourself. And I don't know that anyone would have an answer online better than what you can hear yourself. Whichever works for you, it's great. Just know that whether you realize it or not, you've gotten very used to the sound of that old mismatched pair. So you may be like, hey, on paper this is supposed to be better, but I like what I had, even if you are in OCD hell. Matt Kelly has a 79 Deluxe Reaper that suddenly lost about half its output. Not as much volume and breaks up quickly. Okay, I know what's going on here. Not intermittent. Yep. Any ideas? Tried replacing rectifier and power tubes. All right, one half of your output section is not working. And so you're hearing a class B. You're hearing a push but not a pull, or you're hearing a pull but not a push. And you're going to have low volume. It's going to be very gritty, distorted in ugly kinds of ways. Even Neil Young would not want that sound. And that can be a sign that you have a bad output tube, or a bad screen grid connection, or a bad cathode connection, or something's wrong in half of the phase inverter. It could rarely be something as simple as you have a bad tube in your phase inverter. So one side's working, the other side's not. But I would start at the very, very beginning, which Julie Andrews says is a very good place to start. I would look at the input of the phase inverter and confirm that each grid leak is good. So 1 meg on one side, 1 meg on the other side. I would confirm that the cathode and tail of the cathode the phase inverter are good. I would confirm that you have good bias references on either side of the output coupling caps, and that the grid stoppers are good, and that the screen grid resistors are good, and that your cathodes are grounded, and your screens are connected, and you have screen voltage on both tubes, and you have grid voltage on both tubes, and you have plate voltage on both tubes. Something on one side of your output is working, and it's not working on the other. And I cannot tell you beyond what I've just said what, though it's very common that it's a screen grid. The screen grid is probably the screen grid or a bad phase inverter tube are the most likely suspects, but voltages will tell you all. Let's see. Trying to find the next question. Bob Olson says, I've always been curious about the Celestion Creamback. Oh, I don't know. Have you? Some give a poo on a British voice speaker and an American amp. I think the entire concept of an American voicing and a British voicing is insane. I love the sound of the Creamback 65 and the Veteran 30 and the Vintage 30 and the G12M65 and the old G12Ms and the ET65 with Fender amps. And I find that people ascribe magical qualities to place of origin that don't correlate to reality. The Utah speaker is as American as you can get, much more mids than any greenback. A lot of the Oxfords were very, very mid-rangey and punchy, and all these adjectives that people would usually use to describe, say, some Fane or other UK built. You either like it or you don't, but don't worry about whether it's British or American. And I could go on in that length, but then we're talking about politics, and it's just... let's see. So if you like the Celestion Creamback, get one. Try it with your American app. They'll get along great. Let's see. All right, Donald Pratt's is another example. Come on, guys. Please, please, please put those question marks. Donald, you're lucky that I saw your question because I'm trying to scroll through. Help these old eyes out. Put your question marks in front of your question. I can see it better. 60-cycle hum and my reverb gets louder when I turn the reverb up on my 1993 Rivera amp. Volume still at 0. Well, I don't know which Rivera you have, but many of the Riveras used solid-state circuits with transistors for the reverb, and it's very probable that you have a combination of bad bad transistors and bad filter caps for those transistors, possibly even a bad low voltage converter in that circuit. There are a lot of things in those 30, 40-year-old Riveras that are at their end of life, and they're replaceable, but I had that exact same symptom with a Rivera, what was it called? Anyway, 120-watt Rivera, I don't remember what the model was, and its reverb was noisy as hell, and it was old transistors, and I replaced resistors, transistors, and filter caps for that circuit, and the voltage regulators, and everything sounded great at that point. But your Rivera might have a tube circuit, in which case you ignore everything I said, but I don't know which model Rivera you have. Sorry. Anyone have a suggestion for a good compressor pedal to use with an AC30C2 with EV speaker? Well, I don't think that anyone needs a compressor pedal, especially with an AC30. The amp will compress. If the amp is given a hot enough signal, the amp will compress. And a lot of people set their compressor so that the amp never gets a hot signal. I have never heard with the exception of some slide players, any compressed guitar sound, and with the exception of the stuff that like Paul Jackson did on Thriller, where that's a really particular kind of thing. I just hate the sound of that squashed modern country thing. It just takes all the soul out of the amp. I thought that, it wasn't my playing, but, the Telly stuff and those speaker comparisons I did the Deluxe Reverb. Part of it is because it was a Telly, even though it was a loop, it was recorded straight off a good Telly into a Deluxe Reverb on 4, and you could hear the amp compressing. If I had stuck a compressor pedal on there, that amp would never have had it. It would have been, the amp would never have contributed what it's able to contribute, because the guitar would never have pushed the amp beyond either never pushed the amp beyond a certain point, or would have always been pushing the amp beyond a certain point. So you wouldn't get any of the benefits of how an amp compresses. I think compression should always be done in post, unless you're playing slide or very specific R&B stuff, in which case you don't need an amp for that, just an EMG, some Strat with EMGs into some compressors going DI. The outboard stuff, that in post compression is great, because then you're shaping how that the recording of the amplifier with the microphone sits in relation to other things. You can control the dynamic range of the entire amplifier, as opposed to limiting the dynamic range, neutering the amp's ability to be an amplifier. I am obviously the wrong person to ask about compressor pedals, because they suck. If you want ones that sucks less, spend a lot of money, get an Origin, I guess. The Origin Effects, it's capable to make it barely compress at all, in which case you have something on your board for $300 with a blue LED that says compressor, and you're barely compressing at all, and you can kind of get a good sound that way. But it sounds better with it off. It sounds better with it off. Let's see. 1990 Fender Custom Vibrolux Reverb, among the worst amps. Customer ran up with only one at 6L6 for a long time. Amp hums, weak output, replaced every electrolytic, destroyed the output transformer. Yep. The CVR, and they had a version of that they called the Vibroverb, had some weird issues with the reverb circuit and those things. But yeah, you run it with only one tube, it will die. Eddie Van Halen loved to fuck with guitars. He would tell people that he only ran 3 EL34s, or I guess he said 6 CA7s in his old 68 Marshall, and people would do that, and then they'd end up killing their output transformer and sounding like shit until then, because the output section wouldn't be working right. He never ran it with 3 tubes. He just made shit up, 3 tubes and turned the Variac up to 140. Where was I? I'm missing. There it is. Okay, it's scrolled. Yeah, there's tons of L&D 150 effects loops, several designs being sold. A lot of them are the same thing. I don't think there's any substantial difference between the Metro loop and the one that Friedman's got. They're good ones and they're bad ones, and the good ones all tend to resemble each other very, very much, because if you want to do an effects loop with an L&D 150, this is the approach, and so the goal dictates the result pretty much. So the good ones end up being much the same. And it sounds like I'm criticizing them. I'm not. It's go to the hardware store. They sell a lot of hammers. They all look like a hammer, and if one does not look like a hammer, there's something wrong with that design. What's the best material for an amp chassis, steel or aluminum? It depends on what you need the amp to be. Weight is a concern, but with weight, you get into, there's a limit to how big a transformer I want to use before the aluminum might deform. Whereas if I were to do the same amp, smallish amp with steel, I'm not getting any real benefit, except it's going to weigh more. And then there can be, how are you machining things? And they're very, I'd rather have a really well-built aluminum chassis than a really poorly built steel chassis, even if, in theory, the steel can be better than aluminum. I would say ultimately steel is usually the better option if it meets all the design criteria. But aluminum can be done very, very well. And with aluminum, you don't have to worry about rust. And it does have a weight advantage and can be milled versus bent. So there are things you can do with good aluminum design that you cannot do with steel. So sorry I gave you "it depends" answer, Martin. No one really likes that. We like to have certainty in this life, but not all things have a this or that. It's like this, it's like this and that. It's like this and like that, like this and that. What's the benefit of matching screen and plate voltages in a Pinto? I always thought the screen was supposed to be a bit lower than the plate. In theory, the screen should be lower than the plate, but sometimes it isn't. And sometimes you get weird and wonderful results. It looks like an old AC-15 where the choke is, after the screen. There's some crazy things out there that shouldn't sound good, but end up sounding good in their own way. And you get a lot of compression with that circuit as a result. What wattage rating would I choose for a first dropper resistor in the power supply of a 5E3 Deluxe? Gringo Big Axe. I have a 4.7K 1 watt. Is that okay? Well, I would not use a 1 watt there because that is essentially taking the place of a choke. And I would say that given what you're running there with a pair of 6V6s, you probably would be fine with a 2 watt, but given how inexpensive resistors are and how many good quality small ones are on the market, I would go at least a 3 watt. I would probably choose a 5 watt and never have to think about it again, because you can get a 5 watt Vishay wire wound for like $2. That's about the same size as an old 2 watt carbon comp, and just leave it a little bit of lead length, maybe 3/4 of an inch on either side for some airflow, and that thing will never ever have an issue. Hey, Patrick Pierce is watching with his 9-year-old daughter. She'd like to know what is my favorite guitar that I own. That's a very good question. I'd ask what your daughter's name is because I like to be friendly, but that's a weird thing to ask on the internet, so I will not. But I will get it for you. Let's see here. Weather's been changing. Let's see if we're in any kind of tune. No. I used to play violin. I used to play piano. And that's what I played. And there's a point to this, I promise. When I was like 14, I went to a friend's house, and they are all playing guitar. Not very well, but they had guitars. And I was stuck on this Casio keyboard with a tiny speaker, and I couldn't be heard, and it was frustrating. Anyway, later that night, we had gone to the video store, back when we used to go to a video store and rent movies. And I think my friend's mom, a bunch of us spending the night, our friend's mom let us pick out like 3 movies. And one of the movies we picked out, and I don't know why we picked it out, was a movie called Help by the Beatles. And when I started watching that movie, I wanted to play piano. And by halfway through seeing that movie, I wanted to play guitar. And not just any guitar. I wanted John Lennon's J160E, the acoustic guitar that John played. And after a long, long time, I finally played one, and it wasn't a great guitar. But I found this Gibson Southern Jumbo, which has the same look as that guitar I wanted, as my hero had. But it sounds better and plays better. These strings are a little bit old, but and I grew up before seeing that movie, listening to my parents' Beatles albums. And Rubber Soul and Revolver were the two albums of their albums, all their albums. I chose those two and Stevie Wonder's Talking Book. Those are the three albums that I chose as like a 3- and 4-year-old, and I would listen to them over and over again. Back when I felt very grown up, being trusted to put the disc on the player and put the needle on, and I would just do this for hours, and I would study the liner notes and the pictures and all that, and then I got this guitar. And this is the one I would take over everything else, just because, especially when it has newer strings, these really need to be changed. As soon as I play any of those things, I hear those old records. And I don't play that kind of stuff on the channel very often. Let me put this stand is not good. Let me put this into the guitar. I can't, in the other room, I can't afford to drop this. I don't play this stuff on the channel very often because people don't care about acoustic guitars on this channel, sadly. I put myself in position to be the anti-acoustic channel, which is not my real intent, but also because all those songs are heavily copyrighted, and I'm hoping I get away with playing those little bits on here. I'll put this back in the other room. So that is my favorite guitar. Now, Patrick, ask your daughter what her favorite guitar is if she has one, because we'd like to know. Let's see. Josh Bittner asked, would an amp switching box like the KHE4 amp cab effects loop or someone from In-Audio Delisle affect the signal of the amp, tired of switching speaker cables? I don't know. I've not looked into all those things. I have made them in the past for people, but I use discrete relays so that when if this amp were routed to this output, that was the only connection that was there. But I don't know how they're doing that. You should contact someone like Dave Friedman, who does rigs on a larger scale than we usually end up getting here in Memphis, Tennessee, where people are looking for whatever they can fit in the backseat of their car. The days of roadies are not here for most of us these days. And Bob Olson says, closed back versus open back. I like open back better. For certain styles it doesn't work. If I'm playing real hard rock or heavy metal, no. The 4x12 is better. I prefer a straight cab 4x12. But in general, for most playing styles, especially on stage, I find that you hear yourself better with open back because it spreads out, hits the back wall. You don't have to be right in front of it to hear everything. And I like the sound better. Gary Power says, if I have an 80 kiloamp whole home surge protector, yikes, is it a waste to use surge protection power bars too? I don't think most of the surge protector power bars really protect against anything serious. I think a lot of it's marketing. I would not worry about using it. I don't worry about outlet bars as surge protection. I find them convenient to have more outlets. They're all on the same leg of the circuit. If I want to build a tweed Princeton, should I go to Motortone, Weber, or other? Well, I like Weber's speakers an awful lot, but I would never, ever recommend that you use their amp cabinets. They're not good. Motortone's is quite good. But I do not think that the Tweed Princeton is that great an amp. The Tweed Champ's okay. The Tweed Deluxe, the Tweed Tremolux, those are fantastic. The Vibrolux, but no need to. And the Harvard is a fantastic sleeper. But I would personally skip the Tweed Princeton because it's not much more than a Champ with a larger speaker, and it's kind of anemic in comparison to other Tweed Fender builds. Hey, Tor's got a Mesa Mark V 90-watt head. Is it a hard amp to service? Is there a common failure with them? It is a difficult amp to service, and I've got some videos up on Mesas, including the Amp Center $1,000 video where I tell you specifically and show examples of why I would not recommend buying that amp. The primary issues with Mesas come down to four things. They use 400-volt caps, which have more than 400 volts across them, and those caps fail. They should have used 630-volt caps, but they bought 400 volts and they keep using them. I don't know why. Second of all, they use tantalum capacitors throughout the amps, which are very common points of failure. I don't know why they use them. Other companies don't use them because they fail all the time. Mesa must have just bought a whole bunch of them in 1978, and they're still going through them, but they blow up. Third of all, they layer stuff. So you may have 4 resistors down here with 4 capacitors on top, and you can't see the resistors beneath. And as far as service goes, if I need to change out that resistor, it means I need to remove 3 capacitors to get to that. And it's really hard to find those resistors because they're not labeled well on the schematic or on the board, so it's really hard to know where things are. And Mesa doesn't know either. And then they'll do the fourth category. They're going to do a lot of things that are just kind of really strange. Like they'll often have diodes who get really hot and the solder joints degrade, but those solder joints are overlapping with white plastic standoff spacers. And so there's a lot of stuff interfering with it. Standoffs interfere with a lot of things you need to do, and it makes it very difficult. And to pull a board, you've got to disconnect 30 wires rather than just pull the whole thing up at once. It was never designed to be serviced. I hope that yours never gives you a day's problem. I hope it always sounds awesome for you. It's just statistically unlikely. Yeah, Screaming Jay was a Mystery Train. Now, speaking of Mystery Train, I need to see a man about a dog. We're going to see each other in 7 minutes. That's a deep reference to Mystery Train. I'm going to pull a Joe Strummer. I'll see you guys in just a few. All righty here. Where were we now? Patrick Pierce. I will pop this up on the screen later, and I appreciate the super chat. I'm glad I made her day. Her favorite guitar is his blue PRS SE semi-hollow. Those are pretty. Is that the denim blue? Very nice choice. Thought it would be my SG. I like the SG. After playing piano and guitar, she's a drummer. Awesome. The neighbors may feel differently. Well, that's why drummers exist. I love playing drums. I used to play drums. Not well enough that I called myself a drummer. I haven't had a kit in 20 years, but I sure miss my kit. I had a nice set of Splons. But I just love playing drums, and I love listening to great drummers. Manu Katché is a perpetual favorite. Hey, Patrick Pierce, what are my thoughts on Synergy? I don't have any thoughts on Synergy other than I know that some of the guys who are doing some of the modules, and they're really good designers and good techs, and they know what they're doing. So I expect the Synergies to be great, but I have no experience of them. I've not seen them in person, or let alone heard them in person, let alone been inside them. The only concern I would ever have with anything like that, which is the same stuff I had with the old Ignator modules, is that the contacts can get dirty on modules, and you have to clean them. Think of them as very expensive Nintendo cartridges, and you have to make sure that the contacts are clean, and that you line everything up precisely when you put it in. Other than that, there's no downside to it if you like the sound, and I've not heard them. Yeah, you do get what you pay for, and that can be a warning for some things. Other things, it's a promise. You get what you pay for. If you pay for the better thing, you will have the better thing. Whether you actually sound like Angus, because remember, Angus probably has 87 JTM 45s, and he's got 3 that he particularly likes. You might have get only as far as something that he might have made his top 20, but it's still going to be pretty damn good. Yeah, it's Jim Jarmusch. Yeah, Mystery Train is Jim Jarmusch. That's right. I couldn't remember his name for whatever reason. You should, good and given your taste, you should totally see it. You'd love it. Hey, Doug Otto. Yeah, in an AC15 or AC30, you can do a Larmar master volume. When choosing a pot for a circuit, you look at what the grid leaks are. In the case of AC15, the grid leaks are 220K, so you use a 250K pot, and you put a 2.2 meg or 2 meg resistor from wiper to ground, so that even if the pot were to fail, the tube would always have a bias reference, or in this case, since it's cathode biased, a ground reference, so that the tube can continue to bias even if you lost signal coming from the input, from the output of the phase inverter. It's just a cheap and easy safety thing. So a dual 250K audio taper pot, and the what do you call it? Alpha is just fine for that purpose. And I've got some videos on Larmar master volumes and how I implement them. And I think I'm showing that in a deluxe reverb or a Bassman. I'm sure it's a Bassman, but that'll totally work in the AC15 as well. Hey, Tom KT. Man, these last names that are just random letters, numbers. Tom, I'm glad it worked for you. The G10C is a good choice for Princeton reissue. And for those who like it a little darker for jazz, the ET10 is fantastic. I've only ever had one, I think it was a 415, and a little harmony. I think it was a 415. I'm terrible remembering numbers like that. It was a funky, cool sounding amp. The cabinet was being held together by Spit and Hope, but we did some things about that and got some rattles out. It was a cool sound if that's the model I'm thinking of, but I've only had the one, and so I don't really have too many thoughts other than as far as funky little student model amps go, that was a really good sounding one. Midnight Express was very different, as was Midnight Cowboy. Hey, Jeff. I appreciate the super chat very much. I don't know someone top of my head in Detroit. If Brad's still here, he can find someone on our list in the Detroit area to help you out. At least some Chicago area people, but I'm not sure about Detroit. Dave Friedman, while he's not in Detroit, is from Detroit. He would also probably be a good resource for recommendation. But maybe Brad's, if he's here, he might have had better things to do than hang out with me today. But Brad and I have access to a list of techs all around the world who are good. But I don't have the ability to do that right now because of Facebook stuff. Hey, John Ram, did you see my reply last time? Because you posted right at the beginning. Does the in time with trim speed? So you did see it, okay. Swap tube, replace all caps. It can be lead dress because the lead going to the tremolo circuit is running generally along with the leads going to the reverb stuff, and sometimes very close to the treble and bass wires. And so sometimes separating the wires going to the trim, the speed and intensity pot from the others can lessen that ticking because it can just bleed over. Sometimes you just want to not only get it moved away from that, but sometimes getting it tight against the chassis helps. Sometimes moving it away from the chassis helps. It can be an odd thing. It's rarely is it the roach, but it could be the LDR and the roach. Not the LDR typically. Sometimes it's the bulb that does that. But it's almost theoretical to say that because you end up replacing both of them at the same time. Given that they're $5 to $8, I would try replacing the roach. Let me know what you find because I'm curious about that. And Jeff Dornan, like I said, thank you very much. I'm sorry that off the top of my head I don't know someone in Detroit. And Steve Thompson, thank you very much. Thanks. He said it 16.8 using probes from, all right. 16.8 should do fine if that's a deluxe reverb. In theory, bumblebees can't fly. Yeah, it's an interesting thing that you can. The difference between descriptive and prescriptive. Now our powers of prescription are always not very good. What are my thoughts on diode clipping mods for higher gain on a Marshall-style circuit? I've never heard one that I really liked. I've always found them very small sounding. But there are people who just love the whole Jose stuff. I find that it sounds like bumblebees can't fly, but they can infest an amp. It's not a sound that I've ever found that appealing. I don't know. It sounds like an overdrive pedal. Only it's inside the amp instead of in front of the amp. There's nothing wrong with that. It just doesn't really appeal to me. But if a client really wanted it, I'd do it. And there are a couple of variations, better and worse. If you want to hear it done well. Jason at Headfirst does that very well, and Dave Friedman does that very well in his new hot rodded thing. Is it the Jakey? Yeah, the Jakey Lees, and they're great examples of that approach. It's not an approach that I've ever cared for, but that's purely subjective. If you want it done, those are great examples of how to do it. Well, John Hogg, if I ever get a Synergy in, I'd be glad to use my eyes on it and my ears, but I have not had one in. Come on, guys. I really need those question marks so they stand out. Jeff below's got them going on, so I'm going to get to Jeff's question in a second, but I saw Bob's almost by accident. I'm going to try I don't know what a DRTM is. Is that Deluxe Reverb Tone Master? All right. I assume it should be fine if you're not you wouldn't send the extended speaker out. You'd send the line level out. If you send the speaker out to a powered speaker, things are going to go very wrong for either the Tone Master and or the Tech 21. The Tech 21 is expecting a line level out from the phase inverter. So if the Tone Master has a line level out, I know they have one for front of house. I don't know if that's got speaker modeling. I think you can defeat it. But basically, you want to just send whatever's going to the power section of the Tone Master would also be sent to the Tech 21. I'm not sure what benefit you get from that, other than having even louder. Well, Jeff Dornan, I appreciate it. It's not about buying a spot or taking cuts. I appreciate everyone who is able to give me additional support on this, but I do try to answer questions, even from those of you who don't give me a dime. Womp womp. I would feel bad about being one of those guys who only answers paid questions. That's kind of creepy. I have no take on the Blues Junior. I'm so over the Blues Junior, and hey, version 4, this is different. And for 30 plus years now, it's the same mistakes again and again. They have zero credibility with me, and I give them the respect that they have earned. I have experience with Dumbles. I have opinions on Dumbles. Dumbles are really good amps. They're not the only really good amps in the world, but they are one of the really good amps in the world. Any really good amp that gets played by Larry Carlton, or why did I say Steve Carlton? Larry Carlton or Robin Ford, et cetera, is going to sound really great. Without the great player, it'll sound like whatever player is playing into it. That's the thing. That's the trouble with amps, is they don't actually do the playing for us. They can be an obstacle to playing, or they can be an asset to playing, but they cannot do the thing. And that's what a great player needs, a great amp, so the great amp stays out of the player's way. And what stays out of a player's way is going to depend on the player. So I would not expect most hard rock guys to love a Dumble, and I would not expect most country guys to love a Mesa, et cetera, et cetera. So the right tool for the right job, and for some jobs, a Dumble is a fantastic tool, but so can be a deluxe reverb or a super reverb. There's a lot of overlap between a 76 super reverb that you buy for $800 and put $400 into restoring, and a unobtainium Dumble on the clean channel. Tropic Whisker says, my question disappeared from my chat. I don't remove questions from the chat unless if you posted a link to something. Only the mods are allowed to post links to things. But other than that, I don't have any filter set up. So no one's comments are getting removed by me unless you posted a link to something. I'm just trying to keep the bots off. Hey, cool, Matt Kelly. Yeah, I was watching this as y'all went through. Yeah, you can run a 12x7 temporarily. It's fine. Yeah, Redco's got a good selection of audio, Ted, but it can be very expensive on the shipping. So. Hey, Matt on the water. If you want the best of the best, you wanted the best, you got the best. Contact my buddy. Whom I have not spoken to in a few years now, and his name is escaping me. Oh, goddamn. If he sees this, he's going to be so pissed at me for forgetting his name. That's the trouble when someone names an amp company after themselves. It's easy to... just one second. I mean, I can tell you his first name, and that's not going to... help you find it. Let's see. Just a second. There's so many people now making Dumble style amps. What is his name? We were really good friends for a long time, and we talked all the time, and I've lost touch with him over the past couple of years because life happens. He trying to not Bluto Tone, certainly not Bluto Tone. No, their stuff is not up to snuff. I mean, for the real world, most people are going to be fine with the Fuchs stuff. The Fuchs ODS stuff is quite good. I just saw it and then it went away. I didn't see it. It just is in my head for just a split second. Begins with a W. Oh, Jesus Christ. Welligan, thank you. Yeah. Yella Welligan. God, sorry, Yella. I could not think of your name for whatever reason, which is, like I said, we were pretty good friends for a while and we talked all the time. And he went through, I think, a divorce, and I was going through some other stuff, and then I got swamped, eaten up by this. Yellow Welligan does phenomenal stuff. I'd say better than Howard ever did. But it's very expensive because he is going through and he's buying a whole bunch of new old stock parts, like caps that used to be in this amp and resistors used to be out of this amp. And he'll buy 100 resistors and go through them all and keep 5 of them. I'm not saying that's what's necessary to get a good amp, but he does that. But for most players, I think the Fuchs over ODS would also be just fine. Damn, Yellow Welligan. I am not interested in building a Dumble. I'm finishing a Dumble style amp for a friend based on a kit he provided, and I just don't want to do it again. It's boring. Ooh, the Dumble circuit. Thanks, Colby Jack. Appreciate that. Oh, I think you're going to need to unsee me as Mary Poppins. That's just a horrible thought. Yeah, which Dumble is another thing, but most people are thinking of the ODS, but then again, which ODS? Because there's the Skyline and the Mach 17 and the one he did for this one guy who lives in Jersey City. And hey, Jeremy Tapero, thank you. I just want, this channel is not for techs. This channel is primarily aimed at guitarists, trying to give the guitarist information. A lot of the companies, it sounds like marketing, but the information the amp companies don't want you to know. Help you make better decisions and help you take care of your gear and make choices. Because, I certainly have had to mow lawns and save up to get X, Y, and Z and scrimp and save, and to waste that money on the wrong choice. If I had a vintage amp and we're moving to a place that's a guitar tech desert, would you recap it to avoid issues in the future? I talked to my current tech, and he's not eager to do it. I would not do it if the caps were not in need of it. If it's like, hey, I can probably get another 5 years out of these, well, I might as well go ahead and do it. But I wouldn't do it totally preventatively, especially on a on a Silverface Champ. I would recap it anyway, just to get rid of that multi-section can cap and get something more reliable. Change out the caps in a 78 Champ, and you won't need service other than tubes for forever. If your tech is reluctant to do it, I would be interested in knowing why. Because it's an easy job to recap a Champ, and it's just a little money to make. Oh, yeah, you did, didn't you? Yeah. It's all right. There are a few of my favorite things. Let's see, where were we? It keeps scrolling on me today. It doesn't usually do that. All right, there we go. Would I be stupid to put a couple computer fans through the back of my Hot Rod Deluxe to give it a longer life? Previous owner had a service, new caps, original low voltage supply, no burn yet. No, the computer fans can't help with the issue, since those components are going to get hot regardless, and they're mounted with no air around them. There's no air gap on them. They're mounted right on the board. And if you replace them with new components with an air gap, then just the free air around them is sufficient. You don't need to add a fan. So you would spend more money putting computer fans in there than you would replacing 2 5-watt resistors and 2 5-watt diodes. If it hasn't burned yet, it's great. Go ahead and replace them with some new ones with mount them about a half-inch off the board. Then between the extra lead length and being off the board, they're not going to burn the board, and so you won't need the fans. You wouldn't be stupid to do it, but it'd be wasteful, and the board would still burn. All right. Why does it keep scrolling on me? Jesus Christ. Where was it? Where was it at? It's really hard for me to... I always try to answer every question, and when it scrolls like this, I know that I'm missing something. But I don't know why it scrolls this week and it didn't scroll last week. Jan Swanson said, and it just scrolled again. Is my mouse acting up? I don't think so. Let's see, where were we? All right. Can the spider valve line 6 amp be converted to all tube? No. Sorry. I mean, technically you can, but it would cost way too much. And for half the price, you could just buy something that already exists. It's just the amp chassis were never designed to bear the weight of a real transformer, et cetera, et cetera. Just so many things that would go wrong for that. Gooden hates musicals. Okay, well then let's all sing some musicals for Gooden. I'm not a big fan of fish, but I've had fish pies with cheese, and it does work. It's very, very Nordic. A lot of kind of Gouda-y, Swissy cheeses work. But I prefer to have the cheese on food rather than fish. Why would playing slide benefit from compression? It gets your level up so that you're at the same level as other things you would play, and gives you more sustain and lets people hear the details. If you do the little thing where you hear the glass or steel on the fret, it just brings out a lot of character. Listen to Lowell George and Bonnie Raitt. They're using the same approach with a lot of compression. You don't have to use a compressor for slide, but a lot of styles do that. It's just it changes the feel of the instrument. This thing needs to stop scrolling. It's driving me nuts. Yeah, Bechamel, Parm, and Cheddar works. I've done that with Gruyere. All right. Sorry, the scrolling is driving me nuts. John Hogg is suggesting Pirates of Penzance. So that's great with Kevin Kline and Linda Ronstadt. Let's see. Well, good, and I shall now do Modern Major General for here. I have information, animal and vegetable and mineral. The square of the hypotenuse. I've got it. I'll spare you guys the whole thing, but if I had about an hour to rehearse, I could probably get through about 2/3 of it. That's a tough one. Modern Major General. What do I use to prop up amp chassis while I'm working on them out of cabinet? No. Tube Depot sends almost everything in these boxes that are about 4x4 by 12, and they're just stiff enough to really work well. At some point, I'm going to replace them with some nicely cut and sanded chunks of 4x4, and I'll probably dip it in some kind of like truck bed liner and make it look more fancy, but these work great, and I have an almost endless supply of Tube Depot boxes. I'm glad I made her day, Patrick Pierce. I just love the idea that we've got kids who can watch this kind of thing and be interested in this kind of thing. I might have to watch my damn language a bit, but you know, if she's going to be a drummer. Pastor Batonnet, it's got some Mojo Nixon reference. I hung out with Mojo one afternoon. He was a cool guy in his own bizarre way. I was working at a music store and he came in, and he was thrilled that we had a whole bunch of Lightning Hopkins records and stuff. Our store knew Mojo Nixon. Our store needed no fixing. Hey, Scott Chris, I have no thoughts about the 40-watt black panel concert 4x10. If it's a new amp, I don't have any concept of it. I have not heard of a new 40-watt concert 4x10. If it's an old one, they're great. I've got a 62 concert in the other room. It's going to be coming on the channel soon. But I don't know what the one you're discussing is. I've heard not great things about the Tone King Iron Man. That is something that I have done research on, but not done my own research on. But I've seen a lot of very detailed comparisons of different attenuators on the market, and I would not trust the Tone King Iron Man myself, so I cannot recommend it to anyone else. Just based on what I saw in those videos and my knowledge of how Tone King's construction tends to be. L pads and T pads. Are those blue caps in my BE50 the part of the amp that stores the most voltage? Is that a Friedman? I think he's had some series of amps where the filter caps are blue, in which case the answer is yes. But the real answer is that a question like that means don't touch anything inside an amplifier. Be very careful even looking inside an amplifier if that's a question you're asking. And I'm not being mean. I'm not being elitist or a gatekeeper, but you can hurt or you kill yourself or hurt or kill the amplifier if you don't know exactly what you're looking at all times. I try to put out a lot of information in my videos about how amps work so musicians can learn about these things and know what they can fix and cannot or should not even touch. But I'm aware that there's a danger that if I put stuff out there showing me doing something, that it might lead some people to think that they should or could do that. And I don't have time to show the thousands of mistakes I made along the line to getting to the point where I don't make those mistakes anymore. It's a very dangerous series of mistakes to make. But if those blue caps if it's a Friedman brown-eyed 50 that you're describing, and he was using some blue labeled filter caps at the time, then yes, but I don't know without seeing inside the amp. Why do tube amps sound and feel better? We'll get into that another time, Pastora. It's a really long topic, and it's not always a true statement, but it's a true statement for a lot of people a lot of times. John Newton, I am still taking work. That's where the channel is. The channel is a reflection of the work rather than vice versa. But I am so booked up right now that I have not been accepting anything in for a little bit. And I have not had time to go through every email this past week. Sorry. I know it can be frustrating out there. I won't be able to work on everyone's amp. If I were to pretend to promise that, I would just disappoint even more people. Yeah, Zafranc is my favorite channel on YouTube. It's phenomenal stuff. Thank you, Emac J. Aerophilix or Philix, I don't know if it was original or not. I don't know what it is. Sorry. Yeah, good old what's his face. I feel so bad. Yeah, Yellow Welligan is doing phenomenal stuff, but for most people, the Fuchs is quite good. Peter Perone, you're in luck. Look at the last 3 videos I put up on the channel. I've got a whole bunch of videos on deluxe reverb reissues and speaker choices for them. Stop right now, call him live now. Well, I suppose I could call him. Do apologize for saying, hey, someone asked what the best Dumble copy or build in the world was, and I almost remembered you. Well, I cannot call him. About 3 years ago, I had to change phones, and when I did, most of my contacts migrated, but not all of them. So I don't have Yellows on there. I still have it. I can still contact him on Facebook Messenger and stuff, but I don't have his phone number. But otherwise, I would have been willing to do a live apology to him. Hey, Mike Hill, I would avoid the little AC4s. They're just not very good. Yeah, rusty chassis can be very problematic. Rust is not your friend for a number of reasons. It could be fixed, but it probably would cost a lot, and it would possibly cost more to restore a rusted one than to buy one that's in better condition to begin with. Though it hurts my heart whenever I see an old amp that someone has just totally abused like that. Yeah, I kind of agree with good and tropical whiskers on your tech. Midnight Roller Coaster is working on a Supersonic 60 right now. I'm sorry, man. That's rough. So much stupid in front of you right there. Yeah, bypassing the effects loop, and but they've got two kind of sort of. They have an effects loop, and then they've got insert and return before the power amp. So I'm trying to remember the sequence, but I think you can just go from the effects send point in the circuit to the input of the phase inverter and skip all that stuff, and pay attention to the low voltage supply with the 5 watt Zeners and resistors that like to burn the board, and all the wonderful, wonderful IC caps. I'm sure you know that drill. Hey, Tony T. Any opinions on a 76 Super Reverb with a master volume push boost circuit? It's selling for $1,600 USD. Great channel. Thank you. Thank you. That seems a bit high. I've seen 76 Super Reverbs going for like $800 not too long ago, but the market's crazy. I don't know. From a ton of YouTube reviews, Amplified Nation is well reviewed. Well, I have not done a review of an Amplified Nation because I haven't had an Amplified Nation on my bench. And Brad's not done a review of an Amplified Nation. And beyond that, every other YouTube amp review that I've ever seen has been absolute bullshit because they never even opened the damn things up. So 99% of amp reviews on YouTube are advertisements labeled as reviews. If you don't know how it's built and you don't know if it's a good example of a thing, all you know if it's pretty or not, and it's very possible to build a pretty thing that's terrible. Sometimes you get a terrible thing that visually matches it. It doesn't even try to be pretty. That's nice. I appreciate when they warn you that it's hideous, like that Fender Panoverb thing, the Bumblebee model. Thanks, Peter Perone. I appreciate that. I don't like Marillion fish. I don't like the band Fish, and I don't like eating fish. But I think I'd rather eat fish than listen to the other two. The only fish I like was on Barney Miller. Hey, Sonny Silversmith, your 78 Fender Super Reverb that blows a fuse when you turn it on. Don't turn it on. You've got a fault in that amp. It needs to be looked at. It could be as simple as a bad power tube. It could be something dramatic like a shorted power transformer. Have a tech look at it. You got a 68 Fender Super Reverb that crackles and pops like crazy. Again, that could be a lot of things. Could be bad caps. Could be bad grounds. You need to take it to a tech, Sonny. Take both of them to a tech. I cannot diagnose fully from here. I'm sorry. But I'm not the only tech in the world, thank God. Hey, Bob Egan. He just recently picked up a Marshall 100-watt cab with greenbacks. Been running a 68 Princeton reissue into a 300-watt cab with vintage 30s. Why does a greenback cab seem way louder? Whew. So you went from 4 vintage 30s to 4 greenbacks. Just a second, I got a cut that's driving me nuts. I'm going to cut a piece of my flesh off, but I'll do it off camera. For the most part. Ouch. But now it won't be flapping around. Two things come to mind. Number one, well, really primarily one thing. I don't know what the impedance of the 4 vintage 30s was versus the impedance of the greenbacks is. So you may have had a mismatch before, and now it's matched, because you're going to lose quite a bit of volume if you have a mismatch. So you have a 60. Say the Princeton's expecting an 8 ohm load, and say your vintage 30 was a 16 ohm cab, and your new one's a 8 ohm cab. That could be the difference. I think a vintage 30 is a more efficient speaker than a greenback. I can't tell you beyond that. It could also be a faulty wiring inside the cabinet. Not all faults prevent sound. Some faults it's just not quite as loud. It's not working as well as it could. I'm glad to help Midnight Roller Coaster. Supersonic can be made a lot better than Fender made it, but it should have been even better. Thank you, Tropical Whiskers. Hope it helps. I'm trying to get to the next question. Hey, John. What speakers are the closest to the CTS Sonicos for super reverbs? A reconed CTS. No one has made an Alnico 10-inch speaker with a 1.5-inch voice coil. They've all got 1-inch voice coils. They don't last as well, and they don't have the right sound. The best option is to find and spend for the old CTS Alnicos and have them reconed. This is the old Eminence blue one that everyone told you needed. They said this was the one to get. It's got a 1-inch voice coil, and they fry. And that's not even the worst sound a voice coil can make. Sometimes they sound like it's got sand in there. I don't think any company makes the best. I think Victoria gets pretty close, and you can make them even better if you know what you're doing. But too many people out there are copying the things that Leo got wrong, instead of saying, this is all right and all these things here need to be improved. That's a long subject. But if you get a Victoria, you'll probably be happy. We do try. Especially not tuna. Ugh. Thanks, Chris Harrop. Yeah, I mean, I sure pay. I bought my car basically because every month I'd have one or two at least Hot Rod DeVilles come in. Basically, Hot Rod DeVilles and Hot Rod Deluxes paid my car note. So thank you, Fender. People talking about tuna for some reason. Well, Martin, I'm sorry that you didn't go with Fish back in the day. Maybe you could have stopped him from writing Kaylee and still made some money in the process. Lobster rolls are boring. All right, wow, I'm caught up to the end. We got like 8 minutes to go, and we're actually getting to the end. Hey, John Smith, Marshall DSL 40 CR less than a year old, shipped the bed, started playing it, started sounding like I was playing through a fuzz pedal, and the volume started cutting out, and it died. Well, I doubt that the amp shit the bed. It's probably a bad tube. Tubes are glorified light bulbs, and they can last for 20 years or 20 minutes or anything in between. And it is not uncommon for people to come in and say, my amp died, and I open it up and the one tube is bad. Don't worry about it. Number one. Number two, if it's less than a year old, it should still be in warranty. So Marshall, while it's in warranty, will take care of you. But before you even initiate a warranty repair, just make sure it's not a bad tube, because that sound you're describing is a sound of tubes going south. Good and Fish was the nickname of the singer from Marillion, a British prog pop band, kind of in England, a British band in England. What a great sentence! In the late 70s and 80s, and he was very, very tall and very, very eccentric. And I never understood the appeal of Marillion, but they kind of said, okay, Genesis is going more of a pop direction. We're going to kind of stay more Lamb-wise down on Broadway kind of thing. It just never appealed to me, but I understand why people got it. And for some reason, this bizarre, vaguely poppy prog band with this giant man at the front of the stage had a number one hit in England. It's one of those hits in England that the rest of the world doesn't care about. It's like Mull of Kintyre, Paul McCartney's Mull of Kintyre. Paul McCartney's biggest selling hit in the UK, and the rest of the world's like, oh God, is that thing again? So strange how things work. I love watching all the videos. Now that we're towards the end, I can just talk. I love watching all those videos, like top 10, top 100 hits of 1976 in the UK, because it'd be like, okay, we all know that song. We all know that song. And what the hell was that novelty tune? The Brits used to be such suckers for novelty tunes and bizarre instrumental things. It's like they were like totally on, and the same thing for, I'll watch the German ones and the French ones, like, okay, we all know that song from 1984, but what the hell is that thing with the duck? So prone to novelty hits. Let's see. Ampeg GU12 trim doesn't kick in until the speed is at 2 o'clock. Any ideas where to start? Yeah, it sounds like you probably have weak failing caps in your LFO, and so the caps. What's the best way to put this without taking too long? If the caps aren't working really well, it's really hard to push them at the slower speed, so the LFO can't. And when you speed it up, it can keep the pulse going. So it's usually a sign that you've got failing caps in the low frequency oscillation string. And if that's not enough information for you to get to the fix, then take it to a tech. I probably would like Bob Mould's new record. I didn't know he had a new one. I'll check that out. I love Bob Mould, and I love Husker Du. Brian K says, I'm looking at both the Sir Bella and Ombre. Do you have a preference? They're very, very different amps. The Ombre, it's like a small Marshall kind of thing. If you wanted to do ZZ Top, early ZZ Top stuff, and not go deaf, but still have a pretty cool clean and have a pretty cool tremolo. That's what the Ombre does. The Bella is a much louder, clean amp. It's like if Fender had continued developing their 60s amps, and all right, so think of it as a slightly big brother to the Deluxe Reverb, better built, louder, more headroom, very clean, great pedal platform, great clean amp, not at all overlapping with the Ombre, and not really overlapping with the Sir Badger, which is another great option in that same range. So I think for most players, the Bella would be more useful, but for certain players, the Ombre would be the only choice. Do I remember Husker Du? I was there, man. Yeah, one of the. I've never met Bob, and obviously won't be meeting Grant or anything these days. But I had a great time a couple years ago. I ran into Mike Watt, and I just hung out with Mike Watt for about 30 minutes and felt cool again. You have to remember, guys. Yeah, it doesn't mean anything. Do you remember? I fell for your joke there, Pastor. So, yeah, hard to imagine punk alt rock Lyle. Yes, I met Mike Watt. He gave me the choice to root Hog or die, and I rooted Hog. No, he was great to hang out with. He's a very, very, very cool guy. And I mentioned that a friend of mine and I had gone to see him in like 1991 at this little club in Memphis, and Mike remembered playing that show, and that at his show he broke a string on his bass, and my friend Tex got that string off the floor and wound it up as a bracelet and wore that bracelet for like a decade. And so I was able I got a picture with Mike Watt and signed, "Hey Tex," and sent it to my buddy. So yeah, Mike was very cool. He doesn't get recognized in public very often, so he was a little bit surprised. But I didn't fanboy him. But I was like, "You're fucking Mike Watt." So yeah. Anyway, I guess we're right here at the end of it, and I've got some stuff to do around the house. I hope you all have a good week. Let me get this off the screen. I hope that everyone is well as. Sorry, hit the wrong button. I hope that everyone is well as the world gets crazier and crazier. It can be very discouraging. It means a lot to me, especially at this time, to have this international group of people here. Because the more that the people around the world know each other and talk to each other, the less they can manipulate us against each other. I wanted to wear a Canadian hat or something for this chat, but I wouldn't have gotten here in time. And I don't actually follow hockey, but I thought about, do they have sports teams in Denmark? I might have to get a jersey. Not Denmark, Greenland, though. Denmark would certainly work. Anyway, be well. See you guys next time. Thanks for being here.